4 minutes after 11 is the time. Well, okay. It's sort of tongue-in-cheek when I say everyone's a critic, but occasionally you do begin to wonder whether you're in danger of disappearing under the waters of armchair or backseat drivers or armchair experts. But there was a bit of a consensus towards the end of the last hour that we shouldn't have been talking about it at all. I don't agree with that, for the record, but I certainly wouldn't argue that the conversation we're about to have now is less important than the one we had then. Quite a few of you are asking me why we're not covering more about the fact that if you, British people living on the Costa del Sol, waking up to some astonishing nightmares now that Brexit has actually happened. Drivers having their sandwiches confiscated because the rules regarding import and export of food, as people like Kieran and John Shirley have been telling us for 4.5 years on this programme, finally now kicking in. Fish prices in Scotland collapsing as red tape hits the exports. Bankers losing hope in normal rights to trade in euro-registered shares. Director of Brexit at UK Finance, a group of bankers, told Parliament yesterday that this is the beginning of market fragmentation. Of course, the food supplies to this country being compromised as well. The answer is that at the moment I can't do it. Not because... it's because it makes me very cross, actually. I'm just going to confide in you briefly. I can do a degree of comedy or lightheartedness. I took very seriously the money that I put in a charity tin in the run-up to Christmas, because the charity I elected was one that had helped a friend of mine that we lost just before Christmas, in his and his family in their final days. So that kind of helped me mitigate the anger I feel when I see all of the things that some people have been saying would happen. And partly, actually, generally a little bit of online criticism doesn't touch me, but some of the abuse I received over the last few years, particularly with regard to Donald Trump and Brexit, was, we had to get the police involved on occasion. So I am very angry, actually, that the people who told you none of this would ever happen, that all this was Project Fear, that all this was some sort of exaggeration and nonsense, I am very angry that they've got away with it. But I was angry that they'd got away with it by the end of 2016, when it became crystal clear to many of us that the entire Brexit project was built upon an absolute farrago of lies. Absolute lies and ignorance or misunderstanding. So while I cling desperately and quite sincerely to the old adage, contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned, I'm not ready to talk about this stuff yet because, I told you so. We can do that in a funny way, but there's nothing funny about this. If you've had your livelihood turned upside down and you thought you were voting to have a better life, if you've had your business strangled by red tape and you thought you were voting for less red tape, if you've seen your fishing catches rotting on the dockside and you were told that you were going to be better off, if you were sick and tired of all the immigrants coming into Britain and now you're getting chucked out of Spain, then that last one I do struggle to feel much sympathy for. But I'm not ready yet. Sorry. Maybe I'm wrong on this. Do let me know, as ever. But I'm just not ready yet. But I'm keeping a list. Don't you worry. The stories, my goodness me, they're mounting up, aren't they? And of course, the other problem is quite a lot of people who encouraged you to vote to leave the European Union are now, for the rest of their working lives, prevented from telling you the truth until they admit that they were wrong. Same with Trump, actually. You remember all the people that invited you to pick a side when Donald Trump was racially abusing Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, and how many British people chose the fascist American as opposed to the elected Brit? Yeah. So all of the people who told you to vote to leave the European Union, even if they are supposedly in the business of providing you with information, they're not going to provide you with that information because it makes them look like idiots. And none of us like looking like an idiot. So the long list of stories that were once described as Project Fear and have now become incontrovertibly Project Here are hardly ever going to make the news. Even the BBC, which of course tries to walk a tightrope of impartiality, will be accused of bias every time it reports something that is simply true. Imagine the kind of person who sends me a text saying, well, why aren't you talking about how awful the vaccination thing is going in the European Union? With which there are two obvious problems. The first is I have talked about it, and the second is I don't derive any pleasure from seeing people in other countries become more likely to die than people in my country are. I derive pleasure from seeing people in my country protected from the likelihood of death, but call me weird, I don't take any pleasure whatsoever from looking at France and thinking they're more likely to die than they would be if they had a vaccine programme as good as ours. So that's what Brexit has done to you. I presume you weren't wishing death upon the French before the country fell into this rabbit hole of rancid racism and the weaponisation of ignorance. But I'm not ready yet to start running through all these stories. And I know that I have to, because all of the people who encourage you to smash yourself in the face with a rusty frying pan, just as they've done with Trump, they'll be washing their hands before tea time. Oh, no, nothing to do with me. Oh, no, nothing to do with me. Tell me again how you encourage people to respond to Donald Trump's abuse of our mayor in London. Right. You see what I mean? 10 minutes after 11 is the time. Sorry, I didn't feel that one creeping up on me. We're supposed to be talking about something completely different. I can't say categorically and beyond doubt that the social media brouhaha surrounding school dinners is 100% kosher, but I've looked at how other reports have been conducted, and it seems there is certainly a case to answer. It began with one mother going online to show what had been sent to her to cover I think it was a 10-day period, actually. Pictures of the small amount of food they've been given to last them 10 days. So you had £30 vouchers that parents received to spend in supermarkets when schools closed for remote learning. And these have now been replaced by... this story is going to make me hurl. I'm warning you now. Because this is what happens when you let people talk about crack dens and brothels in the context of food vouchers. This is what happens. One mother has valued the contents of her parcel, having run through the prices at Asda, as being about £5.22. So the first question you ask, because I know you pretty well by now, is, well, who's getting the 30 quid? To which the answer in many cases appears to be a company called Chartwells, which is part of a group called Compass, which is run by a fella who's a Conservative Party donor. As far as I can tell, I will correct and retract any of this if it turns out to be wrong. Paul Walsh, the chairman of the Compass Group, was a member of David Cameron's business advisory group. So Chartwells has responded to one of the photos, claiming that it did not reflect the specification of one of our hampers. Right, lads, first off, don't call it a flipping hamper, all right? It's a pathetic pre-packed lunch, and if they were getting 30 quid's worth of gear, you wouldn't be in the news today. If they're getting less than 30 quid's worth of gear, the only question you need to answer today is, where has the change gone? The group's chairman, Paul Walsh, was a former member of David Cameron's business advisory group. So again, we may need to withdraw and retreat on all of this. But the most egregious element of the story seems to me to be that they changed it from vouchers to parcels. And here's the thing, right? I don't know Paul Walsh. I don't know David Cameron or any members of his business advisory group. But I do know how business works. So do you. We all do. What was I was listening to yesterday? Craft beer, oddly. I was listening to a really good documentary about craft beer, which I'm rather partial to. And I think it was one of the fellas that runs Brewdog, who are the kind of, the biggest beasts in the craft beer jungle. Don't at me to question what craft beer means or doesn't mean, all right? That's not helpful at this point in proceedings. And he said things, there are two ways of running a business, which is a little bit simplistic, but helpful in our current climate. And he said, either you try to make your product as cheaply as you can, or you try to make your product as good as you can. And the price then follows the quality. So I really liked that. I found that really helpful. I appreciate it's a little bit simplistic, but the argument was that they will make the best beer they can make, and then they'll price it accordingly. The alternative would be to work out the cheapest beer they could actually get paid to brew. And you can insert your own labels at this point. Isn't that a strategy? So what I thought of, bizarrely, when this story started popping on my phone yesterday, was that interview with the bosses of Brewdog. Because I thought, if I gave you the job of providing packed lunches to children and there was a £30 budget for each child, what would you do? Now, you, because you're a nice person, you'd go out and get the most food you possibly could for 30 quid, right? Looking at this picture are some manky old bananas, a tin of beans, a loaf of bread, some slices of cheese, 2 apples, 2 carrots, 2 potatoes, what appears to be a tomato, and a couple of packets of Fruit Loaf. I'm fairly confident that nobody involved in that particular decision-making process, whichever company it may turn out to have been, was maximising the amount of food they could get for the child. Now, if you took the mother in all of these stories and gave them vouchers, the vouchers as opposed to the cash, because if you were to give them cash, then all of the people that think the world's ills can be laid at the feet of Meghan Markle and Greta Thunberg and immigrants and Brussels and Muslims and, oh, it's Black Lives Matter this week, isn't it? And you know, you can't give these people cash because that would involve treating them with dignity like human beings. Same sort of people who love the police until they're actually being policed themselves. You know the type. So we can't give the mum the 30 quid because she'd spend it all on fags and booze, you see. That's the rhetoric of patriotism. But we'll give them vouchers. And some people then will complain, oh no, they'll spend the vouchers in crack dens and brothels. Ben Bradley, MP for Mansfield. You know, even after all this time, there's occasionally one just pops his head above the parapet and you think, how the hell has British politics come so low? So anyway, the reason why they don't have vouchers is because of the kind of rhetoric that saw people claiming, parliamentarians claiming, that vouchers would be swapped for services in brothels or for products in crack dens. But then they get rid of the vouchers and they give companies, which just mysteriously happen to have been very close to Conservative governments, the contracts to provide the food, and the food, when it arrives, does not look to me as if it's ever come close to £30. So not only are they making a profit out of poverty, they're also making a profit out of the pandemic. And it doesn't seem to me to be an application to join the Karl Marx fan club to suggest that in some contexts making a profit probably shouldn't be prioritised or even perhaps permissible. And if the last hour of this programme was a sort of slightly confected conversation about something that we probably shouldn't care about, but kind of can bring ourselves to care about in order to have some enjoyable time together between 10 and 11 on a Tuesday morning, this story is as important as it gets. And you might be wondering why I used the word patriotism a moment ago. I'll tell you why. Because to go back to the Brexit conversation, and the abuse heaped upon people who are now being proved completely and incontrovertibly right about everything, from Donald Trump right through to fishermen. We were accused of being unpatriotic by people who will stand by and watch British children be served up with this absolute debacle of a dinner. And they accuse you of not being patriotic because you somehow have arrived at the conclusion that imposing economic sanctions on this country and treating people that live here like second-class citizens is a bad thing to do. So next time you hear the word patriotism or patriot or patriotic, have a really good look at who's saying it and then ask yourselves, where were they when British school children were being treated like scum?
LBC. This is LBC with James O'Brien. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850.
21 minutes after 11 is the time. You have to presume that these businesses lobbied the government against the food vouchers, claiming that they'd somehow be able to do a better job. And then you have to remember the MPs that went along with it, effectively directing funds into brothels and crack dens, as one Conservative MP claimed food vouchers would do. And then you have to wonder what happens next. And now you know. These pictures are actually heartbreaking because I never understand this. I know we talk a lot about the absence of empathy, and I've never had to face the possibility of not being able to feed my children. And the way things are at the moment, I never will. But I've spoken to people in that situation, and opening that box, seeing what was in it, Marcus Rashford has often pointed out, these parents often go without food themselves. And then knowing, having already felt the desperation of being on vouchers, this government has made things worse for you during a global pandemic. Michael's in Manchester. Michael, what would you like to say?
Yeah, so we've got a group of restaurants in Manchester. Obviously, we were forced to close back in March, so we started doing veg boxes. Now, my partner is a teacher in a school with really high levels of poverty, and she came home one day and told me back in April that one of the children in her school who spoke very limited English was unable to use his food voucher in a supermarket because of the restrictions that they have, so you have to spend the full £15, and he just wanted to buy himself a sandwich.
Right.
So
because they can't give you change. I can see the sense in that, just pedantically, you know.
And there is a few other issues with the vouchers.
Yes.
If you don't live near a big supermarket and you can only go to your local shop, they generally won't accept them.
Okay.
So
imperfect.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. So we worked with that school and delivered food parcels all throughout the first lockdown, which the school paid for out of their own budget, because back then the government, I don't think, were giving any additional money. And we've since worked with a few other schools, so we deliver these food parcels, and I think the parents are given a choice, so some of them can choose vouchers if they prefer that.
So is this an LEA issue then, or whatever the modern acronym is? So the people that we're seeing online have moved from vouchers to packages, but there will be other education authorities where other practices are in place, for example, yours.
Yeah, so I mean, the first school that we dealt with, which is my partner's school, I suppose, you know, that probably bypassed some of the procurement protocols anyway. But you know, they didn't have a budget for this. They took it out of their own budget that I think they were saving on supply teachers because they weren't teaching. So he said, I want to make sure the kids get fed.
And
so we got boxes to them.
And you get £30 per pupil for a 10-day period.
Yeah, so that's the box. So we've got a budget of £30. Now, we probably put more than £30 worth of food in that. And the reason we do that is we don't charge a penny for these boxes. The only person who gets paid to put them together are our drivers, who are all out of work cabbies, who get £10 an hour, and they get paid. But our suppliers, who we use, so our bakers, our veg wholesalers, our butchers, we tell them what we're doing, and they say, okay, we'll work at just above cost price. Now, most of our suppliers supply restaurants anyway, so they're struggling themselves, but they agree to
But this is an emergency situation because of the emergency situation, isn't it? It's one emergency breeds the other one because the schools are shut because of the pandemic, which means, and also because of the pandemic, the restaurants are shut and businesses. So there's a space you could fill, and this government has elected to fill it with people making profits.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you see some of the boxes that go out there, it's absolutely disgusting.
Are you one of the least surprised people in the country by what's happened in the last 24 hours, then? You were across this already?
No, I was horrified because we actually wrote to about 100 schools at the beginning of this lockdown and said, this is what we can give you for £15 or for £30 a week. Yes. And there was more than £15 worth of food on there. And you see and you have to factor in that there are certain delivery costs worked out about sort of £2 to £3 a box and things like that. But this is what we can give you for that price. Working with our suppliers, who are all fully on board, working for next to nothing. We don't charge a penny. That this is what.
Why
we can
did you
give
do it, Mike? Why did you do it?
Because when my partner did a home visit to the child who was unable to spend his £15 food voucher, and she told me that him and his 3 brothers and sisters and father, who were all a refugee family. The mother got killed. They moved over here. They don't speak any English, and they couldn't even read Google Translator in their own language. We're all sitting around eating a Tupperware of just rice off the floor. Then I thought, these people need a little bit of help, and we've got the resources, we've got the suppliers, we've got the infrastructure because we've got empty restaurants, we've got teams who are willing to help. And
Did you ever get in touch with the Department for Education, or did you ever get in touch?
No,
with them?
we looked at the.
So I just wondered if this particular contract for David Cameron's former business advisory group member was put out to proper tender. There's no reason to suspect that it wouldn't have been. They've put all the contracts out to tender during the coronavirus crisis, haven't they?
Yeah, they followed every protocol and made sure that all their friends got looked after. But even the hoops you have to jump through, and also what was really evident is if you look at the food, the food voucher or the free school meal voucher acceptance scheme, what you have to. The registration process to use those vouchers, because a lot of families who live in certain areas where a supermarket might be a bus journey away, and you have to factor in the bus fare, they will only go to their local shop, which is probably going to be a little bit more expensive as well. So it's the poverty premium that they have to pay.
So how interesting if you treat these people like human beings rather than cliches or tabloid inventions. Some would choose to have parcels over vouchers if they could be confident that the parcels would contain at least as much as they could buy with the vouchers, or more.
But I think everybody's needs are different, and the schools are perfectly capable of speaking to the families directly and saying what would you prefer. And for some people, a parcel, if it's of reasonable value,
that's the point.
Is definitely a good thing to have. But some of these parcels that are going out, how could you possibly take money from a hungry child, which is all they've done for the sake of profit? I mean, and it's not only just a little bit of profit. I mean, these can't cost more than £5, some of them, and they're charging £30 for it. It's sick.
I'm glad you said that. I don't know whether it's because we sort of had a little bit of fun in the first hour of the programme. I don't often get emotional on air. Sometimes it hits me when I get off, but this is just gross. Isn't it?
But it's the worst. It's the worst kind of profiteering that you can imagine.
If it is exactly as it appears to be, and at the moment the evidence is mounting, the website of the company concerned has crashed. I don't want to sound like a complete snowflake, but I can't believe this goes on. Does that make me sound really naive?
I was surprised at how bad it was, and I know that. I don't know if you go back to when. I remember when Theresa May pledged to do the free breakfasts for the kids, and it equated to 17 pence per head. And you think some of the spending is ludicrous, but when you look at this and you see the pathetic servings of food, it's embarrassing and it's so shameful. It's the worst kind of bad, because it's literally food, taking food from a hungry child. That's all they're doing, and it's so wrong.
Good God, you're right. They're taking food from a hungry child. Jacob Rees-Mogg would probably call it uplifting if he was able to offer a view or explain why it's a wonderful example of free market in action. I
think something needs to be done, and I think these companies need to be outed, and they need to pay it back. They can't get away with this now. They can't. And
do you want to know something weird? Can I tell you something? Sorry, I'm treating you like my therapist, but I don't want this to be true. This one. I don't know why this one's got me so hard. I don't want this to be true. I want evidence to come. I want to have to apologise on the programme tomorrow and say, actually, this was nowhere near as bad as it looked at first glance. Because this is just... How does a country find its way back from this? Because you know that people will be encouraged to... Someone will pick up on the fact that the example you experienced was a refugee, and they'll be encouraged to close their eyes to the fact that, you know, families who could trace their lineage back to the Doomsday Book will be caught up in this as well. And other people will be encouraged to think, well, if you can't afford children, don't have them. Other people will be encouraged to think that, well, the parents have probably spent it all on a flat screen television. Other people will be encouraged to think, well, this is what happens if fathers don't stay around. Every little bigot and prejudiced person in the country will be encouraging decent people who began decent, to come down and blame something other than the system for this. And I just don't want it to be true, but you're confident that it is, I sense.
Well, I think some of the evidence of the parcels that families have received is there, and you can see the photos. And I don't know how true they all are.
No, of course.
There's not
if it's happened to one family, it's one family too many. Do you want to plug yourself?
How degrading to those people as well who have received those parcels to be said, this is what you're worthy of, this is what your child is worthy of.
Yeah, but that's why you have to dehumanise them, you see. If you're a right-wing tabloid journalist, you have to dehumanise them, otherwise people would respond by imagining how they'd feel in the same situation, and the minute they do that, well, the model of government that we're currently living under collapses. But that's why empathy is the enemy, you know. It's why Black Lives Matter gets portrayed as Marxist. This is just unbelievable. Unbelievable. Can I help you at all? Is there anything we can do to help you with what you do?
I mean, to be honest, at the moment we do have some availability. So if any schools around Greater Manchester need any support, then they can. I think the best way to get in touch is to direct messages on Twitter. Our restaurant is called Vertigo. It's at Vertigo MCR, as in Manchester.
Yeah.
Send us a direct message if you're a head teacher.
But only if you're a head teacher. Don't. Michael's got a lot on his plate, if you pardon the pun. Unlike these poor kids, then don't waste his time. Except with genuine inquiry, mate. Thank you for what you're doing. I'm sorry that you have to do it.
No,
but my God, I'm glad you are.
Thank you.
From Eat Out to Help Out, to starve a kid to save a quid. It's 11:33. It's not even saving a quid, is it? It's redirecting it from the hungry children to the companies run by former members of David Cameron's Business Advisory Group. Holly Harris is here with your headlines.
Leading Britain's conversation. LBC with James O'Brien.
22 minutes to 12. It's a weird one, that, isn't it? I don't get it. I know you think I'm such a snowflake sometimes, but food parcels have been brought in to replace £30 vouchers given to parents to spend in supermarkets as schools close for remote learning. But one mum valued the contents of her parcel at no more than £5.22 if bought from Asda. And then, of course, the floodgates open. And I hate this. I really hate this, because the reason why they get away with it is because people are ashamed of being poor. What calls did we take back in the day from people who would almost hide their faces when they went to food banks? Uplifting, Rees-Mogg called them. That was, I can't remember whether that was before or after he accused the people who died in Grenfell Tower of lacking common sense. But hey, Doff Cap, Tug Forelock, he's on your side. People are so ashamed of needing this sort of help that we don't know how little help they're getting. And as I understand it, this scheme came into existence because these companies claimed they could provide more food for these children. I am close to you can probably tell, there are times where you just think, why do you bother? Not because this stuff goes on, but because people in the same profession as me dedicate their entire lives to facilitating this sort of abuse, to facilitating this sort of scandal, to encouraging you, as someone who's currently doing okay, just, to look at these poor souls and feel hate. Why do they have kids if they can't afford them? Just start the flipping stopwatch before you hear someone say that. Seriously. It could be you. It's the point about safety nets. John's in Bath. Sorry, John, I'm getting a bit emotional. I wasn't expecting that, but my God, I just can't imagine. Right, one more. Do you mind? Sorry, because I'm just thinking about my family, and I don't
absolutely
go in hard on my family on the show, since they became old enough when their school friends know who I am and what I do. But I would just say this. Every family in lockdown is dealing with a different selection of struggles, some big, some small. And if an incredibly comfortable family that can have Deliveroo every night if they wanted it is, dealing with some of the negatives and some of the issues, I cannot begin to imagine what it would be like if you opened the box in which your children's lunch for the next 2 weeks was contained and you saw this. I just can't. Sorry, mate, what did you pick up the phone to say? I've got to warn you now, if you're ringing in to defend this, I might tear your head off and kick it around the studio.
No, I think it's indefensible, isn't it? I was working as a teaching assistant in Bath, and my job was to take the food parcels to the families that couldn't get into store to pick them up for themselves.
Right, yes. Okay.
We were supplied by Chartwells, and the picture on Twitter isn't very far away from what we had to sort of deliver.
Okay.
And obviously, I was go into people's doorsteps with these bags of food, almost embarrassed in a way that it was kind of all we had to offer. The standard of the food sometimes was horrendous. Some of the vegetables were rotten. The bread came to us frozen and had a lifespan of over 2 years.
Where are the? I mean, I can see a couple of apples and a couple of carrots. Where are the greens?
There weren't really any. We sort of it would sort of depend, but the portion that you saw would only be really replaced by something else if it was there. But it was mostly sort of carrots, potatoes, and sometimes we managed to swindle a cucumber somewhere. But
And are we?
yeah.
I mean, this isn't your field of expertise, but are we confident that these companies, and I'm obviously slightly cautious about quoting one of them before we've managed to get a response from them. They've said they're looking into it. So there'll be more than one company involved in these provisions. But are we confident they're getting £30 per pupil?
That's something that I'm not entirely sure
Good
about.
man. No,
because
thanks. I'd much rather people say I don't know than
as far as I'm aware, the food that was provided to the children on free school meals was a direct substitute for the food the hot meal that they'd normally get at school, which is around about, and I'm sort of guessing it's around about £2 a head per day.
Yeah.
So that's what sort of a free school meal coverage is. But still, that food parcel, even if it was sort of 11, supposed to cover £12 per child per week, isn't £12 worth of food. The head teacher that I was working for,
and you've got delivery costs and stuff.
Well, we did it as a school, just in our school minibus.
You're a mug. You know that, don't you? That's what they think of you. And Michael in Manchester, dedicating his unused restaurants' resources to helping hungry children and not making a penny profit out of it. I swear to you, mate, they think you're a mug. They think that you're mugs for doing this, and we've put them all in charge. 4 members of the cabinet now wrote that book, which, oh dear.
I mean, I was doing it as a job as a teaching assistant that I've since left because of the salary I was working for.
So you were being
£50.
paid.
I was working for £50 a day as a teaching assistant. That was my job, working in the school. But one of the things that upset me the most is when somebody complained, or we had a few complaints that we directed to Chartwells, we had a letter from, I think it was like the regional representative. It was the guy that would come into our kitchen sometimes. And they wrote a letter back offering advice to how to make the parcels sort of spread further.
Right.
And it was the most insulting thing I'd ever sort of read.
Yeah.
And I was told I had to give these letters and put them in the food parcels. One of the quotes was,
"Go on.
You could put the potatoes that we give you in the oven, and they'll be delicious as jacket potatoes," which I think is pretty useless and quite insulting.
Yeah.
And the other one was, have you tried if your child doesn't like the food, you could organise it on the plate in a fun way, like a funny face.
I'd struggle, wouldn't you?
It was
to keep my cool in those. And do you know who I've just remembered?
It was appalling.
You know how much jip did Jamie Oliver take for pointing out what happens when you put profit at the top of the list of things that the people providing school children with food are going to be pursuing? It's Turkey Twizzler territory. And I can't believe I'm going to say this. And Jamie, I know you're probably listening, but correct me if I'm wrong. Some of these kids would be grateful for a Turkey Twizzler.
100%, yeah. Yeah. It was awful. I mean, it was sort of basically cheese sandwiches. And the thing that frustrated me the most about it is the vouchers are a great idea, although in my opinion, logistically, they were awful. I don't know if you've ever been at a supermarket and you can't afford to pay for the food in your trolley.
But not since college, and it was only because I'd spent all my money on beer, so I don't think that counts.
But it's the most.
But I did have to leave a full trolley of food at Sainsbury's once, and I'm a middle class cliche in trousers, you know. So if I felt humiliated by that, imagine how you feel if it's a occupational hazard every time you're at the till.
And so, you know, vouchers could have worked. They didn't on a logistical basis, which I think was horrendous. I think you've kind of got two ways. You can either take control over it, and you take responsibility and you feed these people and you feed them properly. The benefits of that, obviously, what I found was the fact there were one or two families that I'd go and see weekly that, as a school, we definitely needed to see. There were children that I went to see that probably wouldn't have had much contact with anybody else because of the situations they were living in. So to be able to have a reason to go and do that, I think was beneficial, and the food parcels were useful for that. I think the other thing that you probably do, and seeing as a Conservative government that don't take much responsibility, you'd probably be best just to credit people with £30 and trust them to raise their kids.
Yeah. Are you new to phone-in radio there, John?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'll tell you what would happen if you did that. They would all be accused before the first travel bulletin of the morning of spending it all on vodka and Super Kings or flat-screen televisions.
I know.
Because they're not humans, these people. That of course, but it's very patriotic to treat them like subhuman scum. Yeah. It's important to remember that at all times.
Yeah, it is.
John, thank you, mate. It's
a pleasure.
No, well, it's not, is it? But I know what you mean. It's a figure of speech. It's probably the... Yeah. 11:47.
James O'Brien on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
52 minutes after 11. Genuine, serious questions only, which is usually an invitation for all manner of mischief. But I think today will be different. How has this happened? How have the families of school children who qualify for free school meals, how have they ended up being sent during lockdown what appears to be about £6 worth of food by companies that are getting 30 quid per pupil? Just talk me through your knowledge, your understanding, your evidence or logistical experience. That is what I need now, not least because I'm not very happy. Andre's in Tetsworth. Andre, what can you tell us?
Yes, good day. I'm at a catering company that does school meals, so I just want to sort of give a background and the layout of the costings of these things, so we all know what we're talking about, really.
Yes.
These companies never tendered for hampers because that is sort of suicidal to do that. These are...
Are you sure? I mean, it's not. I just need to say I don't know that for sure. They may have been put out to tender.
Compass is a competitor of ours, so they do catering for schools, so they would be in place already.
So they tendered for the original contract, but not not for the parcels.
Not for the hampers.
Okay.
No, they would. So
and for the record, it's important, full disclosure, they are a rival of yours, so that may colour some of what you tell us, but that's fine. You're still here.
So the option is that we provide hampers for them, or they can have vouchers. Last year, the schools got their free school meal allocation from the government, plus they got vouchers as well.
Right.
This year, they only have the free school allocation, which is £2.30 per child. Then they still, so if a child doesn't want a hamper, that money has to be converted by the teacher into a voucher, basically. Now the cost. And when it first came out,
but that's not an option for some of the families that are being reported today. They don't have the option to say no to the hamper. I'll have the voucher instead.
Well, I'm in Oxfordshire. This is, I don't know.
Yes, it clearly varies. It clearly varies from county to county, and I don't want to sound ungrateful, but I am particularly interested in the parents who do not have the choice. The mother who says, if they gave me the vouchers, I could do a hell of a lot better than this.
Of course, and that's what we said to the teachers as well. We said to them that it's much better for the child, the vulnerable child, to have the voucher than we try and provide them a hamper. So I'm just going to run through the cost with you quickly for the hamper that we suggested.
Please.
And so it's a bread of £2.30 per child, 5 days for the week is £11.50. So what we put in the hamper is a loaf of bread, 100 grams of cheese, 184 gram tin of tuna, a cucumber, tomato, a 415 gram tin of beans, 6 eggs, 5 bits of fruit, 100 grams of pasta, 2 jack of potatoes, milk, and then the packaging, and that comes to £12. So that is a pretty crappy, excuse my language, that is a pretty unsubstantial hamper.
It's better than this. Two potatoes, a can of beans, 8 single cheese slices, a loaf of bread, 2 carrots, 3 apples, 2 malt lunchbox loaves, 3 frubes, some pasta and a tomato.
But exactly, so that company itself should be ridiculed for doing that. But
ridiculed? I'm not going to pick you up on your choice of words, Andre. That's my job.
Yeah, no, I'm on radio, so I can't
I know.
say it all.
I hear you. And the mum who got sent that wrote alongside the image, issued instead of £30 worth of vouchers. So that's what she would have got previously.
Exactly.
I could do more with £30, to be honest.
But even the hamper that we provide is not sufficient. It's not, and we sort of advise the school to go down the route of the vouchers. But for £2.30 is not the amount they got last year for vouchers. So,
but with the vouchers, you could go to. Oh man, this is just so Dickensian. But at least with the vouchers, presumably, you could go in at the end of the day and go, you know, to the bits that have been marked down or the food that's about. So if you were near a shop and you could go every 2 or 3 days, you'd be getting 10 times more and much fresher food.
Exactly, but that's what we suggested to the schools. But unfortunately, we have to. That is the option we have to provide, or the school have to provide. Because, like the previous caller said, it's some people don't want to use the vouchers. They'd rather pick up anonymously a package from school. But
because of the shame attached to pulling the vouchers out of the till.
But the only people losing out here are the children. Because you've got to understand the company that provides the catering. I mean, if you do 180 pack lunches or hampers, I've got the utmost respect for the person who did the vegetable boxes. But the problem is that these are vegetables that you put into boxes that's been given by the vegetable suppliers, because that's packaging they have. For a company to do actual food hampers, where you've got to break up a 10-kilogram bag of pasta, portion it up, put it in packaging, and same with the other products as well. You've got to employ them to do that. It's just a crazy
way of doing it, isn't it? And also, I mean, the other thing, I know you know all this. It's not a great phone line, Andre, so I'm going to say thank you for your contribution and, of course, for the work that you do. But, of course, anyone who shops, it's when they do a recipe. And I said, well, you can eat this for £2.19. And you say, no, but you can't, because you've got to buy a packet of salt. You've got to buy a sack of flour. You've got to have your condiments in the cupboard. You've got to have oil. You've got to have... So, oh, man, this makes me cross.
So I can't put a packet of ham in there, because a packet of ham is £5.50. I can't start breaking a packet of ham up and giving...
Whereas with a voucher, I can buy a packet of ham at the beginning of the month.
Exactly.
I know you know this, but I mean, how do you account for the fact that the government apparently doesn't understand what we are conducting by way of a conversation of the bleeding obvious?
Well, I mean, I don't. These are supposed to be very clever people, but I mean, for clever people not to be able to understand that I don't know. It's very difficult. You just have to look at other things that they do. It doesn't make sense. I mean, this doesn't make sense either. I don't know who makes these decisions.
No, well, I can remind you that Dominic Raab is Foreign Secretary, Priti Patel is Home Secretary, Liz Truss is International Development Secretary, and Kwasi Kwarteng is now Business Secretary. The fifth author of a book or a pamphlet called Britannia Unchained, Chris Skidmore, was until last year Universities Minister, so attached to education, and they are the co-authors of Britannia Unchained, and it states that British workers are among the worst idlers in the world, that our welfare system has ballooned beyond all recognition, corroding the UK worth ethic, that we have bloated state, high taxes and excessive regulation. And so the question of how this could possibly happen with apparently intelligent people in charge becomes perhaps slightly easier to answer. There are no prizes for predicting that we will be continuing this conversation after the news. This is what's happening, I'm afraid. And do you know what the weird thing is? I know you're sick to death of the I told you so's, and I'm doing pretty well at avoiding them. But bizarrely, before Brexit, if you had to pick my hardiest hobby horse before the Brexit stuff, when hardly anyone listened to this programme and no one knew who I was, but I think we talked more about this weaponised free market and indeed about this book stroke, Rachel Sylvester in the Times calls it a pamphlet. I don't know how big it is. We talked about it a lot. And look, they're winning. And if you're cheering, you are literally cheering, as with Brexit, a diminishment in the quality of your own life. What do we want? More hungry children. When do we want it? Well, just as soon as the dividends have been paid on the shareholders who run the companies that are taking money out of hungry children's, taking food out of hungry children's mouths so that they can pop a few more pennies in the pockets of the plutocrats who also conveniently happen to be Conservative Party donors. It's 12 noon.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC. This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
4 minutes after 12 is the time. I think one of the problems I have is like everybody else perhaps, is that you can't help but see the world through your own windows. So, conversations such as this are very easy to conduct. And the grave injustices at the heart of these stories are very easy to feel. But there are no perfect solutions to complicated problems. There are merely... I think the job of politicians is to make incremental improvements to the status quo, but we're living in a curious period in the United Kingdom at the moment, where the populism of politicians like Boris Johnson has thrived upon encouraging people to act against their own interests and simply to hate on each other. Whose life's got better? Don't care. I want his life to get worse. Right, okay. And it's that kind of toxic ideology that leads us into the sort of waters that we're exploring today. Jack Monroe, who you'll know as the bootstrap cook who came to prominence after publishing recipes showing how she managed to provide nutritious food for their boy in extremely straitened circumstances. They're in characteristically coruscating form on Twitter this morning, but with some good news. Is it would appear, and obviously the problem is, instead of reporting on the really important and serious stuff, we've been so busy reporting on the really important and serious stuff, like, Meghan Markle and 2 women drinking tea in a woods coming to the attention of the police. And what's there today? Oh, yes, should gay actors play gay parts? Instead, we've been so a bit dazzled by the really, really important stuff like that we've forgotten to cover the trivialities, like whether children in our country are going hungry. And they are. But Jack is making a lot of noise and saying noise does work. And I think it's fair. I think, as I understand it, schools will make some of these decisions. So schools will have opted to go to the boxes and the parcels where they could actually have stayed with the vouchers. I mean, Andre suggested to us from his experiences in Oxfordshire. And it's not our job to know all this stuff. It's the Secretary of State for Education. Oh, my God, it's Gavin Williamson. I mean, how bad do things have to get before one of these clowns is actually treated with a modicum of recognition for the idea that actions have consequences? This is Gavin Williamson, isn't it? It must be. This is Secretary of State for Education. I mean, whose desk does this end up on? Where does this particular buck stop? The same desk sat at by the man who presided over the exams debacle of last summer? The same man who presided over the debacle of having schools open for one day because it was perfectly safe and then shut immediately because it was so unsafe? Could you imagine what Gavin Williamson would have to do to be fired? Because I can't. One imagines he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single scintilla of support from Boris Johnson. Russia should go away and shut up, being perhaps his most famous contribution to the public pageant. So it's not my job to know what the score is, it's his job. And the tragedy of man, this one's really got to me. I'm going to shut up and listen now. Rebecca's in Rotherham. Rebecca, what would you like to say?
Hi, I work in a school in South Yorkshire, and we're not in an affluent area at all.
Sure.
And we've had to send food parcels out because this time there is no government scheme. We did do vouchers. Now,
Yeah.
I will go on to a downside of that as well, because it is a two-sided sword, unfortunately.
Yes.
So we've actually used the catering that is the company in our school, and the staff have actually had to put all these food packages together. So I was doing that in the first week of lockdown, and we've done a 2-week package. Now, I will be openly honest with you. As I was packing them, I lodged my complaint straight away that it's not anything. It's food.
Yeah.
It's not anything to create a meal with.
Right. Well, no, they are, aren't they? School lunches, if you have them in school, are proper meals. But if you've got it's packed lunches. I mean, anyway, you carry on. Sorry, I said I'd shut up for a while.
No problem. So we're giving away a lot of dried food to try and make it last longer for the 2 weeks that we're allocating.
Yeah.
So, but like potatoes, bread, some marge, cheese, a tin of tomato, a tin of beans, some oranges, cookies to class as a dessert. Now, our free school meals, we do them for around £11. When we did them in the first week, the government's now launched that we can now apply for each child for an extra £3.50 through school. So £11, and then we're tied into the wholesalers. So I obviously lodged a complaint, and it's the price we're paying. They're putting Heinz beans in, and they're charging £1.09 per child.
But I can buy it from my convenience store in one of London's, most salubrious suburbs and pay less than that. Yes. Not even from my local big supermarket, but from my local convenience store where you pay a slight premium because you don't have to schlep a mile to the big supermarket.
Yeah, you can buy from the supermarket down the road 4 tins of beans for 89p.
Well, you wouldn't be getting Heinz for that, but you'd rather have 4 tins of own brand than one overpriced tin of Heinz, wouldn't you?
You would, that's correct. When you're feeding on a budget, you shop as a budget. You don't buy Heinz. I don't even have Heinz. I have supermarket.
I'm not going to apologise to you, Rebecca, for eating Heinz beans, all right? I'm not Marie Antoinette. I'm not. I'll have my beans. So when you say the wholesalers, would that be the company that provides food during term time?
Yes, so we use a company. It's an outsourced catering company that we have in our school because of the academies, how the academies are set up.
So they've got the deal, so they can tell you whatever they want a tin of beans costs.
Yes, and 4 pints of milk, £1.80. Well, that's only £1.10 in supermarket.
But this is so blinking obvious. I mean, fair play to you for blowing the whistle and calling it out. But the average school has got way more on its plate to be able to dedicate the kind of time and attention to this specific issue that people like you would like to.
That's correct, yes. And as much as we would like it to go back to vouchers, because I do understand when you're shopping on a budget, you can get far more. And it's easier to shop for what your children will eat to feed your family. But the other side of that is in the first lockdown, we had local supermarkets ringing, and I was taking complaints that they were arguing with parents who unfortunately were buying alcohol and cigarettes with the vouchers.
Yeah, except that that's illegal, though.
Well, in the first lockdown, in the first few weeks, they couldn't actually stop them.
Well, you can't prosecute the shopkeepers for doing it. If a shopkeeper is prepared to take it and then surrender it, and it won't be happening in the big supermarkets, it'll be small independent shops. If they're prepared to do it and then claim the money back, the problem I've got is that I could find you 1 million families spending it all on food, and then one family spending it on Super Kings. And by the time it's been put through the mangle of the right-wing media in this country, the 1 million families obeying the rules and behaving honourably are completely ignored, and the one scumbag breaking the rules is held up as an example of how everybody else is behaving. Yes,
that's correct. And then we end up with inadequate food packages.
Of course we do.
That as a school, I mean, I take complaints every single day at minute from parents, and I said to them, I totally understand, but our hands are tied as well, while other companies are making massive amount of profits and charging 70 pence and even more amount on any one product.
I thought I was cross already, Rebecca, but that beans thing's really got to me, because you think not only, well, that's how they do it then, isn't it? So I'm thinking, how can they possibly persuade anyone that that's 30 quid's worth of food? And they say, well, actually, Gavin, I think you'll find that potatoes cost £12. And Gavin went to go, oh, that's very expensive. Well done, carry on. Oh.
Because I've also complained about we haven't got enough fresh things in our house.
Well, that was the other thing. I mean, it's hard enough getting the kids to eat fresh food, but it's even harder if you haven't got any in the house, isn't it?
That's correct. And,
stop saying that's correct. It'll be the title of my next book, Rebecca, if you carry on like this.
I mean, we've had to. I mean, I was in a meeting with the catering company, and I said, surely why aren't we've now got a plan to buy big 20 kilograms, big massive veg packs. But again, it's all the school staff now that have to come in because we've got to package our own parcels for our parents.
Just beggars belief. And of course, when you make a complaint, who does it go to? Do you know? I mean, who cares? I mean, literally, who cares?
The company, just the private company. They're just all they'll say to us is, all they do say to us is, our hands are tied. That's who we use, the wholesaler, and
that's what happens. And that gets come down, and then you know, trebles all round, and woohoo! There's another donation to the Conservative Party. Presumably, they've made donations to Labour parties as well but Labour isn't in charge at the moment. Are you
get another company on board? And they're like, no, that's our selected supplier.
Yeah. I mean, it writes itself, this script, doesn't it? What do you do? Are you a dinner lady, if that's still the correct term?
No, I work in admin.
Right, so you get pulled across to do this because it's a job that needs doing, and they use all hands to the pump. Oh boy!
Yeah.
And how hungry? I mean, it's quite a deprived part of the country. How I hate asking this question because I didn't realise I was living in 19th century Dickensian London, but in 21st century conservative Britain, how many hungry children do you think there are in the average class on a given day?
Oh well, half of our students are on free school meals. On just over 1,000, and we have 52% actually on free school meals, so a lot.
Rebecca, you're doing the work of the angels. It should, of course, be the work of the politicians, but we are where we are. 12:15 is the time. More of your stories on this, evidence and experience on this issue is more valuable than anything else. 0345 60 60973, including, because we must not fall into the traps that others spend their lives inhabiting, including the flaws in schemes. So there are reasons why vouchers are preferable to many families, but not preferable to others. We took a call very early on in the first lockdown from a mum who couldn't leave the house for medical reasons and couldn't get food deliveries because she was on the vouchers. And Ava, my producer, got in touch, I think with Sainsbury's. I don't want to give the wrong supermarket credit on this one. And we fixed it. We fixed it so that she could pay for delivery food with her vouchers, and I think they extended that a little further. But it shouldn't. I mean, where's the government? And don't reply by telling me that they've all gone on a bike ride at the Olympic Park.
This is LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 19 minutes after 12, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the thing is that we've been here before, long before Brexit, or shortly before. Brexit came to dominate so much of our time together, and then latterly the coronavirus and this government's catastrophic handling of it. The warnings about what would happen if you allowed this libertarian, ludicrous. They call yourself a libertarian when you boast about abolishing freedom of movement. It's even like they can't even agree on what words mean. That this is what happens. So the profit, the market will fix everything. Okay, what's that contract you've got? School dinners. What are you going to do? Well, obviously, I'm going to give the kids as little food as I can possibly get away with, and I'm going to keep all the money for myself. What do we call that? And I mean, it's enough to get cross with the people responsible rather than the people who are perhaps complicit. But the alternative is not communism. The alternative is either putting it into the hands of people who recognise that when you're feeding children, your personal profit is not the top priority, or you run a system which used to be in place that is nationalised, public sector. I'm getting a lot of messages from people who work for some of the companies involved. I'm loath to read them out for legal reasons, but trust me, this story won't be going away, and I would not be surprised if the vouchers are back on the table by tea time. 21 minutes after 12 is the time, because that's what they do, isn't it? They wait until the problem becomes unbearable and then they act. Marcus Rashford being the case in point. And now with the lockdowns and vaccinations, there's no clamour for 24/7 vaccinations, they said yesterday. Well, you haven't asked. People aren't going far enough. We need to see what sort of numbers. Well, don't wait to see what sort of numbers. Do what is right before you've put it in front of a flipping focus group. Just do what is right. Do what is obviously and clearly correct. Feed these children. 22 minutes after 12 is the time. And if you're not on Twitter, good for you. But please get yourself across what's going on. Just have a look. If you don't look at anything else, have a look at Jack Munro's account, at Bootstrap Cook. And just avail yourselves of what are children. Because if you really have fallen for that patriotic bilge that's served up by massive racists when they're trying to encourage you to smash yourself in the face with a metaphorical frying pan, then just ask yourself what it means, that word, when it is used as a wedge and a weapon by a government that rewards its donors with money that should have been spent on feeding hungry British children. And by British, I obviously simply mean people that live in Britain. 22 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Rosie is in Epsom. Rosie, what can you tell us?
Hi. I received the free school meal vouchers last time round for my son.
Yes.
And it was fantastic. It really was. I was so grateful. I was brought to tears. I was so grateful for the help. And I fortunately live near town, so I did exactly what you said. I go at the end of the day. I'm very fortunate I can do it. And with that £15 voucher, I could go to Waitrose or Marks and Spencer's and get steak for £1.50. You know, it was just used by date, but
Yeah.
I've got a freezer. And I could buy chicken, I could buy grapes, cherries, strawberries, you know, all the stuff that I know he would eat.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic. It was a godsend. And then they changed it to this package.
Do we know why, Rosie? Is it could the school have stayed with the vouchers if it wanted
I
to?
don't know. There was no choice, and to be honest,
Doesn't matter, does it? You were told. You don't have any choice.
and
This is what you're getting now.
I'm so grateful for the help. So I felt ashamed to complain when I received it because it was a potato and a couple of. It's the kind of stuff a lot of people already have because it's the cheaper stuff. A lot of people have dried pasta. It's more if they're at school, they'd have the hot food like a cottage pie. You know, even if you're not vegetarian, but the proteins. You know, the proper food the child really needs to sustain them.
Yeah.
And that's just not there. You know, a couple
So
of
were you getting a
biscuits
box a week? Were you getting a 15 quid box every week or a 30 quid box for a fortnight? Well, not were. This is what you're getting now. I think.
Yeah. Well, I've stopped picking them up because it's just not stuff that he wouldn't eat it. It's just like paper bags with a potato and a tomato and that kind of stuff I generally tend to have. And
because you clearly shop very carefully with what money you do have.
I'm very, very careful. It's more than meats or the proteins. You know, the kind of fresher stuff. That's. And
you're not getting any of that at all. No, I understand. Your store cupboard
and
staples.
I'd much rather have the choice, but to either have voucher or the.
Can I say one thing to you? Can you promise that
Yeah.
you won't feel patronised?
Sure.
You shouldn't feel grateful.
But I think any help at this time.
No, you
any
shouldn't.
help.
Don't set me off, Rosie, all right? You should not feel grateful. We pay our taxes because it could happen to any single one of us. We do not feel grateful for the safety net that we all pay to provide. I pay my taxes not just to help you and your boy, but to help my girls if they ever find themselves in need, and to help my mum and to help you over there listening to this programme and her over there. That's why we do this. The bond that we have with the government is not a bond of gratitude. It's a bond of representation and a bond of delivery. So I'm sorry, but I don't think you should feel grateful. This is your right as a resident of this country to have your child fed by a state that has let him down in so many other ways. So do not feel grateful. Please, you are welcome.
Thank you very much.
You look after yourself.
Can I just say one more thing?
Anything you want. As long as you promise you won't be grateful.
To the parents that feel ashamed, there's no shame because the thing is you can download the app as a voucher.
Yeah.
You can screenshot it. No one has to know. When you do the self-checkout, or it comes up as a gift card, you could have got that for Christmas, the Sainsbury's gift card for £30. It doesn't say government state meal plan.
Look at you thinking of
others. No
others.
one has to know. You just scan your phone, and if you have that device, it's not like a paper voucher. You know, you can just do it, and no one would know. It's very discreet. But I wish we'd had the choice. That's all. for the people that would rather have the delivery, fine. But for the people that would rather have it should just be a choice, really. That's all I ask.
I'm going to allow myself a little moment to point out that even in circumstances such as this, Rosie is thinking of how she might help other people, and you can draw your own conclusions about why that particular approach to the world seems to be so absent from so many echelons of current politics. Quite a few of you are pointing that out as well. There's no shame associated with the vouchers. It's a simple download to your phone. Tulip Siddiq is the Labour MP for Hampstead and Kilburn. More pertinently, perhaps this morning, the Shadow Minister for Children and Early Years. Tulip, we don't have long, and I'm not coming in with my fists up. But isn't it your job to have pointed this out sooner?
We have actually. Hi, James.
Hello.
I was just listening to what you were saying to the other lady, and it's replicated in all the emails I've been receiving. We have actually been pointing it out, and I sort of want to say that I don't want this to become a political football because it feels like it is. What I really want to ask, I guess first of all, to point out that everyone's been shocked by these images of the woefully inadequate food parcels that are being delivered to families, and I really hope this isn't the tip of the iceberg, but the pandemic has been so devastating for family budgets, and we've been told that there's over 2 million children who are now living in households with food insecurity. I've asked for a meeting with the Children's Minister for tomorrow, which she has granted, to ask whether more children are being forced to skip meals and why they're receiving the food that you've seen. I really think that because the children who qualify for free school meals should be getting £15 of food support a week, and any food parcels that deliver to children at home must be substantial and nutritious. This is what it said in the guidelines. Now, if you look at those images, I'm sure you'll agree with me, it doesn't look like there was £15 spent on them for a start. It doesn't look like they're substantial. They doesn't look like it's nutritious. So I'm just trying to get to the bottom of why this is happening and why the government hasn't taken responsibility to find out what's going on and to fix the problems. What I'm going to ask the Children's Minister tomorrow is, how was this allowed to happen? And is the money for free school meals actually reaching the children who need it? Those are the main questions I'm going to ask.
Yes, fair enough.
And then the real question I'm going to ask is about the National Voucher Scheme. And I think the caller before was asking you about it.
Yes.
They did say last week the government promised to restart the National Voucher Scheme for free school meals. And lots of families relied upon it throughout the first lockdown and over the holidays. And we did, as a Labour Party, campaign for it tirelessly. Obviously, Marcus Rashford ran with it, as you know, and got a lot of coverage, and he's the one who did it in the end. But I don't really know why the ministers haven't got this scheme up running as soon as possible and working properly. Like, they were meant to roll it out last week. Surely it should be a top priority in this pandemic.
Well, I think that's a rhetorical question. Can we have a catch-up after you've spoken to the Children's Minister? Because it's easier for you to get access to them than it is for me, Tulip.
Well, maybe you should ask her to come on the show.
Well, the door is
Probably
always
get some answers.
The door is always open, and thank you.
But as soon as I know the answers, I will definitely let everyone know, because I think it's an urgent
And you're right, of course.
question everyone's asking.
It's a timely reminder. There are, of course, cudgels to be taken up on behalf of these children against the people in power, but the top priority right now, as Tulip Siddiq has just reminded me, and I suspect you as well, is to get some. That's close. To get some food into these children's homes. Thank you, Tulip. It's 12:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thomas Watts is here now with the headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:35 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, and we spend a lot of time together. We cover a lot of ground together, and and I know that sometimes it feels a little bit. The last year or so has been very Groundhog Day-ish, obviously, but there are moments where you sort of manage to get away. You know my old thing about having your face so close to the canvas that you've got no idea what the picture actually is. You just think it's a selection of smudges and brush strokes. But some days you step so far back from the canvas, you feel you can see almost everything. And today is one of those days. And God, man alive, the way that Rosie felt thankful for the most basic provision of the most basic foodstuffs for her hungry son in a country that is supposed to boast the 5th largest economy in the world. Brackets, we've just voted to impose economic sanctions on ourselves, close brackets, but we are currently still, I think, the 5th largest economy in our world. And listen, come here, because I know how easy it is to turn you against each other. and I know how lucrative it is for people in my line of work to encourage you to hate on each other. I'm just going to use one of their phrases, all right? I'm just going to use it once. I promise you. All right, I can't promise you because you know what I'm like. I'll probably use it again before I've even finished apologising for using it the time before. But I'm going to use one phrase that you hear a lot in the context of journalism or rhetoric designed to encourage you to damage your own interests by encouraging you to direct all of your anger and bile and dissatisfaction and unhappiness at utterly blameless people who happen to have been born somewhere else. What is the most popular catchphrase of the sort of ghouls that I am describing when they're encouraging you to look askance at immigration or to leave the European Union or to overlook the fact that the National Health Service is currently hemorrhaging staff, or, most obviously in the context of foreign aid, the 0.7% of our GDP commitment? What is the phrase they always use? We should look after our own. Well, go on then. Where are all the people who usually insist that we should look after our own when you find out that our own are being expected to feed their children on a pittance, while, crucially, somebody somewhere is making a profit? The hungrier the kid gets, the bigger the dividend. Go on. Next time you hear someone say that, just have a proper look at them. We should look after our own, they say. And then they never do. In fact, you could be forgiven for thinking that the people who are constantly telling you that we should look after our own while they're encouraging you to be racist and xenophobic are actually also the people who would encourage you on a day like today to come out with things like they spend it all on fags and booze or shouldn't have children if you can't afford them. Isn't that weird? So when they say we should look after our own, who are they talking about? A question for the ages. Tony's in Tunbridge. Tony, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Toby, I beg your pardon.
That's okay.
No, it's not. Right. It's not fact check. Toby is in Tunbridge. What do you want to say?
I've spent the last 10 months just shaking my head. I run a food distribution business. We supply restaurants, hotels, pubs, some schools, and I don't know. I'm not surprised by the images that have come out of these food parcels, but I don't know. I've run out of anger. I'm full of frustration. But this is just so typical of everything that we've seen for the last 10 months. We've supplied. We've thrown a lot of food away in the last 10 months, going in and out of lockdown, as I think most other wholesalers have. We've had almost no support for the wholesale industry, where hospitality, quite rightly, has had quite a lot of support. But there's just no joined-up thinking. You know, we've thrown food away. We've given a lot of food away to food banks in West Kent, but there's a lot of food that has been thrown away because there is just no joined-up thinking.
Well, I get that. I mean, that's clarity and leadership. I'm slightly surprised to hear you refer back to 10 months because, well, I suppose there have been peaks and troughs, haven't they? But the voucher scheme seems to have reached parts that the hamper scheme simply can't.
Well, I think the biggest problem you have is that for companies like us, we're not geared up to pack hampers. We're not geared up to do this. So where you have
you're geared up to deliver sacks of spuds.
Yeah. So where you had the lady that phoned from the school in Rotherham talking about the work they're doing, that's what you hear. I mean, I listened to LBC. I listened to teachers phoning into Sheila Fogarty last week or the week before, talking about what they had done to keep their school open and to keep kids coming in and to keep people safe. And you just shake your head when you think, why does this have to be individuals? Why does this have to be somebody in admin at a school in Rotherham taking it upon themselves to work out that it's easier and cheaper and more efficient to buy sacks of carrots in, unpack them and put them in bags? Then it just... Do you not think that? Do you not just think that... I guess...
But what answers have you come up with then?
Well, you asked the question before the news at midday about why these decisions are made by the people running the government in the way they are.
Yeah.
And the only conclusion I can come to is that they don't have the common sense, but they don't. It's theory. There's no practical application of it at all. I mean, you talked about Jack Monroe.
Mate, you've missed something. You've missed Jack's on in shortly, I think, after the.
Well, Jack Monroe's work should be, and her Twitter feed should be mandatory reading for anybody in either education or from a government point of view, anybody that's involved in the decision-making process that goes on around this. I mean, the ingredients that we sell that are, in a lot of instances, the most nutritious also happen to be some of the cheapest.
Yeah, of course.
But that's not how this contract that ended up with the food parcels that have been photographed and publicised, how that contract ended up being awarded in the way it has. You probably have a better idea than I do about how that actually happened.
Well, I do, actually. So what happens is the companies lobby the government, in this case run by a party that they may well have donated to, or they may have sat on a business advisory group for a former prime minister from the same party, and they persuade these ministers that they will be able to do a better job than the current status quo. Whereas really all they, it seems to me, can deliver is more profits for their own shareholders from delivering the same contracts that were currently in place. So this is why you set up think tanks, mate, and set them on Tufton Street to write articles for newspapers without having to declare who's paying their wages, about why taxpayers are being let down by X, Y and Z, or we shouldn't be taxing processed food and unhealthy food or sugary food because, you know, the profits on the processed food are much, this is the point you've just obliquely made, the profits on the processed stuff that are much higher than the profits on the fresh stuff.
But don't we deserve better?
Well, of course we deserve better, but until people recognise that every single time one of these ghouls from one of these think tanks pops up on the radio or the telly or in a newspaper insisting that we should give more power to business, things are going to get worse.
The only other thing I wanted to say was, and I don't agree with all of your politics.
No, of course not.
I was a Remainer originally, but I've come to accept that we need to work out
we've all
if we're going to do this.
We've all accepted that, but you can't stop telling the truth.
One of the reasons that it's going to be a real struggle to keep some of these food parcels away. We bring in fruit and veg this time of year from the continent.
Well, you know what's going on then.
I've been doing what I do in the food industry for 25 years, and the last 10 days has been absolute chaos.
Would it be fair to say, I've got friends in your sector, the good news is that there aren't as many queues as people thought there might be. The bad news is that's because the trucks just aren't coming.
Yeah, we've got.
No, that's all. I just want a yes or no.
Yeah,
I've got to get to the break.
Yes.
Yes. Well, we shall see, and it will be fixed, but it will be fixed by people who are experts and people who are committed to the national interest rather than people who are now trying to set themselves up as financial advisors. It's 12:44.
Coming up at 1 on LBC, Sheila Fogarty.
Less herd immunity, more herding cats. How should the police enforce the COVID lockdown rules? Softly, softly, or is it time to play hardball?
Sheila Fogarty on LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. LBC with James O'Brien.
12:48 is the time. Jack Monroe is a food campaigner and author who has, I think it's fair to say, been at the very vanguard of attempts to point out how inadequate a lot of provision for hungry children in this country is. Indeed, they came to prominence after publishing recipes showing how they managed to feed their child on a relative pittance. You are presumably simultaneously today, Jack, one of the least surprised and one of the most exercised people in the country.
Yeah, I'm shocked but not surprised.
Yes.
These food parcels have been doing the rounds since March when they were first issued to people who were shielding. And I tried to make a bit of a fuss about it then. Nobody was really very interested.
Sorry.
And it sort of died down and went away. Although it didn't go away because it was still happening. And it just seems to have struck a nerve with people over the last couple of days, what with Roadside Mum's tweet and then Marcus Rashford picking it up and then obviously me doing my furious rants.
Well, not just rants, is it? Because you become a focal point for other people to share their stories and most pertinently perhaps today their photographs.
Yes, and it's. I mean, I've got hundreds of pictures like that in my DMs, but people are understandably quite frightened of being identified or having malicious reports made about them, or even just like embarrassing their kids. Do you know what I mean? So I could share hundreds of pictures,
but I do know
a handful.
You have, and everyone go to @BootstrapCook if you want to be informed. If you don't want to be informed, then obviously you're listening to the wrong radio program.
If you want to completely spoil your day and your mood, I think.
Well, yeah, or just take that righteous indignation and turn it, as you are an example to us all, and turn it into activism and campaigning. Can we talk a little bit about shame? Would you mind? Because I took a call a few moments ago that has. You know me, Jack. I'm a soppy git at the best of times, but sometimes it really. And when Rosie said that she was grateful for what is her right as a citizen of this country, and she gave advice to other parents on how they could avoid the shame, the stigma of the vouchers. How do you shrug? Can you shrug that off? Can you step out of this completely manufactured mindset whereby those who land up in our society's safety net should somehow be ashamed of it?
Well, nobody should be ashamed of it. Nobody should be ashamed of falling onto, hard times or having, some terrible things happen to them that means that their finances aren't adequate to cover the needs of themselves and their families. Nobody should be ashamed of being failed by a system that is designed to mendaciously deprive people of their most basic needs. The only people who should be ashamed are the people who are contriving and distributing this, and the people who continue to perpetuate the narrative that people who are in poverty or on benefits or needing any kind of assistance ought to be ashamed, because that is a lie. The only people who ought to be ashamed are the people who are doling out this cruelty and hardship in the first place.
Do you know where all the we should look after our own and all lives matter broskies go on days like today? Because I can't seem to find any of them.
I can't seem to see a single one, but to be honest, my Twitter's gone absolutely nuts. So, and I have a sort of a roving eye that tends to gloss over that nonsense these days because I just don't have time for it, James. But they are very quiet, aren't they? The people who are very keen to be like, oh, think of the children. We're like, well, we're thinking of the children. Where are you? Like, where's your noise? But people are making noise about it, and that's brilliant, that the stories are being told and people are being heard. And also the company's trying to brush off, oh, this is an isolated incident. It's like, well, it's not an isolated incident because it's identical to the hundreds of other pictures that I've got in my inbox. So they need to take responsibility. If they truly have different guidance for the food parcels that should be being handed out, they would have published it by now. They would have refuted it and said, this isn't what it's meant to do. It's meant to look like this. So that guidance would be issued to schools. So where is it? And why isn't it being published is what I want to know.
Watch this space. Final question. Is it as simple? I mean, there is no perfect solution to problems like this, and rarely do complicated problems admit simple solutions. But the government was supposed to have brought back the voucher scheme. Was that an effective fix, albeit that it took Marcus Rashford to get it extended to the school holidays? Do the vouchers offer a measurably better chance than the so-called hampers?
Yeah, much better, because although vouchers aren't ideal for other reasons, vouchers are easy to distribute. You're not having to schlep around when we're all being told to stay indoors and go and pick up a food parcel and lug it home again. They're more dignified because nobody sees you doing it, but they're more dignified because you get to make choices about what you and your family consume. So you can buy things for your autistic children or your celiac children or your children with very specific dietary needs or your overly hungry children, or you can buy things that suit the needs of your family. I mean, people who are living in poverty have got so few choices open to them anyway that surely we should all be allowed the dignity of being able to choose what food we eat and what we feed our children. And taking away the vouchers and replacing them with a box is basically saying you're not to be trusted, you don't matter, we're going to make this most basic decision for you and we're going to make it really badly. And that is who should be ashamed.
Jo Munro, thank you for all that you do. You can find out more about Jack and their work at the Twitter handle @BootstrapCook, but I would also recommend the recipe books as well. And you don't need me to tell you where her anger was coming from. Time now for Simon Marks. We've only got 4 minutes left. Fill your boots. What's happening in the States?
There's an awful lot going on here, James. I mean,
the master of understatement rides again.
I think the realisation that this country's got a massive problem on its hands. President Trump and Mike Pence met for the first time last night since last Wednesday's insurrection, incited, of course, by President Trump, by his violent conspiracy theory supporters. They hadn't spoken until last night. We're assured that the meeting went very well, although neither man has given any kind of briefing to the press. Mike Pence clearly has a very dramatic story to tell about how he cowered for safety on Capitol Hill alongside the woman who is next in line for the American presidency, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi. It is unclear whether we are going to hear him tell that story or disclose his fury that the President of the United States at no point last Wednesday reached out to Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi to find out if they were safe and secure. Perhaps we'll get that telling of the story after this train wreck of an administration is over. The FBI says the violence isn't over yet. They sent a bulletin out last night to all 50 states warning of violence to come later this month in the state capitals of every single American state. The Capitol Police here in Washington have disclosed to lawmakers that they are aware of plans for 3 separate violent demonstrations in the coming days here in Washington, D.C. that include plans to kidnap and execute lawmakers. Remember, some of those protesters were trying to find Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi, certainly threatening to hang Mike Pence after they were told, completely falsely by Donald Trump, that Mike Pence had the power to overturn Joe Biden's election victory, something, of course, that Mike Pence made it clear was not constitutional power that he had. This city is being turned into a fortress for Joe Biden's inauguration. There will be 10,000 National Guard on the streets here. If you know Washington, it's a small town. 10,000 National Guard for Joe Biden's inauguration. And an abiding sense here of crisis at a time when the US government is not communicating at all with the American people. There hasn't been a single press conference, a single briefing, any attempt by the President of the United States to say to his supporters, who are now being sought by law enforcement in 30 separate states, no attempt whatsoever by him to urge them to abandon any plans they may have to continue, as they see it, fighting for him.
And increasing evidence of how nearly things were even worse than what we saw.
Yeah, this was very, very, very serious. I mean, as we learned through the weekend and saw previously unpublished videos demonstrating what went on, there was at the core of this protest a very dedicated, very violent, pre-planned group of conspiracy theorists who were absolutely determined that they were going to spark a revolution here. They viewed this as the beginning of a coup that was going to undo the outcome of an entirely legitimate election and ensure that Joe Biden should not become President of the United States. And if you look at the numbers, they are deeply alarming. 64% of Republicans told an Economist YouGov survey that they believe Congress should be blocking Joe Biden from becoming President of the United States after weeks of lies by President Trump about the sanctity and security of America's presidential election last November, and Republicans on Capitol Hill giving him for 4 years now as much rope as he ever wanted to bring his government and their political party into complete disrepute.
Simon Marks, many thanks. Not just the politics of it, of course, but also the psychological inability for some people ever to admit that they've made a massive mistake. Someone should write a book about that. We will be back tomorrow morning from 10. Thank you for your time today. I got a bit stickier, as you probably noticed. It's a job, all right, but it's also real life. And the real lives being lived by some of the people we've heard from today in a country with the wealth that we have, albeit that we've now voted to lose some of it. It's just despicable. It's absolutely disgusting. But listen out for the All Lives Matter, for the we should look after our own lot, for the patriots, and ask them where the hell they were when the children were going hungry. Here's Sheila.